You are here, hopefully, to see best practices for delivering a course online. I was mentioning in the text chat earlier that this is one of my favorite workshops to do because I think we really cover some really practical strategies on how to better deliver an online course. But there's a lot to cover, and we go through it really quickly. So just know many of the things that we cover in this workshop, we go into more in-depth strategies and practical ways you can do these things in other workshops. Again, we go into them in more detail. The workshops are also all recorded already, so again, if you had a question and wanted to know something a little bit more deeply, we could definitely have a conversation, or I can point you in the direction of some of our supports. I'm going to just take just a moment to make sure that I am caught up on my attendance, that everybody is officially in here. And it looks like I've done a pretty good job keeping up with my attendance. And I also want to check the text chat to make sure that there's no more questions in there. And it looks like I'm caught up, so that's awesome. First, to introduce myself, my name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Faculty Development Instructional Design Center. I do have my web camera on right now, so you can see what I look like today, but I also have my portrait up there from a few years ago. And again, just some quick contact information if you need to get a hold of me. Email's really the best. For instance, if you were to call me right now, I have my ringer on mute because I'm doing this workshop, and an email I would definitely check right after. I do have some workshop objectives for today. Again, I really want to be able to help you discover some practical strategies on how to communicate with your students, how you might grade student work online, and how you can support your online students. I had asked earlier if anyone was currently teaching online, and I'm going to ask again, if you could just add to the text chat area if you are currently teaching online, or if you're just planning on teaching online. Getting lots of yeses. Oh, one no. That's okay. I think we're going to be able to share a lot of the strategies that we already use for those of you that are experienced with teaching online. I never claim to be the only person that's going to share these strategies. I definitely want to hear what's working for you, maybe what you tried, and we'll all learn from each other. As, again, an introduction to this workshop, there are many things that go into a quality online course. And this Quality Matters graphic that you see before you are all the different things that might make up a quality course. The design, the planning, the development of the course, the actual quality of your content. How happy are you with that, with your textbook or your presentations or other content that you found? Your institutional infrastructure. How does your institution support online students? The LMS, which is the Learning Management System. Here at NIU, that happens to be Blackboard. And then your readiness to teach online and your students' readiness to be an online student. In this, it's a very fast workshop. We are going to really focus in on course delivery. That's the online teaching. That is what is happening in a course when your students are actively involved with the students. So for instance, right now, those of you that are teaching this fall an online course, you're in that course delivery phase. So What's different about online teaching from face-to-face teaching or even blended teaching? You're still going to communicate with your students. You're still going to be grading their work, and you're still going to want to support their learning. So if those things aren't different, then what is different? And I think what it is it may be the approach you take with your students. And so I think it's important to think again about there's none of these things that we should not be doing in our online course, but we just may need to shift things a little bit when we move into the online world, or even for those of you that are already experienced in teaching. What are some tweaks? What are some things that are going to make your workload more efficient, make things a little bit easier for you? So I'm going to break these into those kind of communication, grading, and then supporting your students. And we'll kind of break them up into 3 different segments. So I'm transitioning to talking about how to really open up that communication with your student. And one of the ways to do that is to really try to get to know each other. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions, or maybe even excuses we give ourselves, is that we can't possibly get to know each other in an online course like we can in a face-to-face course. So here are some tips and strategies about how you can go ahead and get to know each other. And the first is to think about your students' motivation. So I've broken this kind of table into different categories. The first one to think about students' motivation is their own self-interest. Maybe why did they choose an online course? What else do they have going on in their lives? And maybe even what interested them about this particular course. And finding out a little bit about that is going to help you to get to know your students, but also for them to understand that you kind of have their back here, that you're a real person, and you know, they're not just taking this automated, self-paced computer class, that there's really humans behind there. I'm glad you're finally in, Dawn. That's awesome. So what can you do that's going to really help your students' motivation in terms of their own self-interest? So try to find a way that you can either connect the material to the students' interests, maybe ask them about how they feel a piece of content, or maybe even the course topics and weekly topics might really help them with something that they're already interested in. Uh, Try to make those connections for them, especially for the courses that might be a gen ed or outside of their normal program. There's still probably real value that the students will get out of the course that can connect them in a different way. Another way you can do that is to share something personal about yourself, but not necessarily intimate. So what I mean by that is um, that's humanizing yourself a little bit again. What can you do that will help um, your students know who you are a little bit better? So that's something you can share early in the course. For instance, you can share any hobbies you have, any outside interests you have, other things that might be going on in your lives, like um, new children, new animals, a change in job, anything that you think that can kind of connect your students to you. I'd like to ask all of you in the text chat area to add something that you would feel comfortable with sharing with your students. That would be, again, personal, but not necessarily intimate. See, lots of good ideas in there. Um, Don was an undergraduate student in the 80s. I think students can really connect to that and maybe even ask you what campus was like in the 80s. Maureen does Three Truths and a Lie with the students. I love to do that one too. That certainly opens them up, but it also gets them really intrigued on knowing what the truth is about everyone. Hobbies like playing a guitar, riding a scooter. Those are all awesome ideas. And as they share those with you, and you share more about yourself, express interest in their lives. And again, getting back to their self-interest, what does it mean to um, have a dog or be a guitar player? Does that mean that they have ways to kind of release when they need to de-stress, which can be so important when they're kind of juggling a lot of things with their schoolwork. And then again, they know that you care. So your students' academic life. Again, show that you know that they're busy people and they have other classes, but also that your class is important and you want them to be successful in their academic life. So I always suggest that the faculty can do that by articulating expectations. So really letting them know when due dates are, letting them know when, how they can best manage their time, let them know what you expect a job well done would be, from anywhere from a discussion board to a written assignment. You're also kind of elevating their academic life because you're really sharing your high expectations you have for them. And then identify and reward what you value. So if you do articulate your expectations, and that is kind of showing what you value. Perhaps you value a more formal style of writing in your written assignments. Make sure that's in your expectations, but also call it out that that is something that you have noticed in the students and you really appreciate them, and maybe you're going to reward them with a higher grade. Also for your online students, really acknowledge either their future professional life or their maybe current professional life. Online students often choose this modality because they are working full-time. They maybe can't get to campus, because they have other things going on, and that might be a career. So any way you can show your content as being relevant to your students, that is really going to help them, again, make those connections, but also show a passion and enthusiasm for your discipline. This is one that comes out clearly when you are in front of them face to face, and your face just kind of lights up and your enthusiasm and your voice is very obvious. So there's ways we're going to talk about how you can do that in your online course. You still want to show that passion and enthusiasm. Next, connect any common skills. I've talked about a formal level of writing. It does not have to be a writing class. It does not even have to be a writing intensive class. But helping your students to become better writers is a really great common skill. So you just kind of want to make those connections for them and let them know that regardless of what they're planning on doing in their future, this is going to be important to them. And then just like I said at the beginning, try to acknowledge that they are probably current professionals and they may have ways to contribute to the course, maybe even lessons learned, but acknowledging that really kind of pulls them in. Friedman says, I have years of teaching experience. I am a study abroad program director and work for the Department of Shameless Self-Promotion. And you made that, me read that out loud. I was just compelled because of the emoticon that you added. And by the way, great job for all of you that are adding emoticons. I'm glad you found them. Even emoticon can tell you 1,000 words, right? But you also teach German and are a real German. That's awesome. Now I know a lot about you. So thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I want to make sure I keep up with my attendance. So a really practical way that you can get to know your students is to encourage them to create Blackboard profiles. And this is just a screenshot of what a Blackboard profile looks like. You can do that by going to the top of Blackboard, and you will see probably a silhouette picture of yourself. I mean, you can add a Blackboard profile to your own instance of Blackboard. And you can start to fill out the information in here. And you can see the students can add their major, they can add different clubs that they're in, they can add how far along they are in the program, and all of those items can be added in there. And what I love about it is when they add the profile picture, you will be able to see that picture in a discussion board. So when you're interacting with your students in a discussion board, you'll be able to see a picture of them, and you're starting to connect that face with sort of the language that's in the discussion board. I encourage my students to add any type of picture they'd like. They can also add a picture that's not of themselves. Maybe it's of their dog Taco, or maybe it's just a guitar icon. But that's still reminding me a little bit about them when I can see that in their profiles. I also like to see how far along they are. That's another great tool for me, because the course I taught was actually a gen ed, and so you know, they're spread out across 4 years, and it really helped me understand them because I knew sort of where they were in the process. So Blackboard profiles, my first really good practical tip. My next one, communicate frequently. So that is really going to help the students stay connected in the course, and again, let them know that you care about them. So one of the ways you can do that is to create Blackboard announcements. Maybe early in the course, you're going to be sending them reminders of those due dates coming up. Maybe a reminder of a major assessment that's coming up. I usually do reminders a little bit more frequently at the beginning of the semester to kind of train them and get them ready and get into the flow of how the semester is going to work. Karen has a question. Is it true of all Blackboard courses, or is this specifically for an online course Collaborate thing? It's for all Blackboard courses. So even if you're using a Blackboard course, just for simply posting your syllabus and maybe some contact information, or maybe copies of your PowerPoints, your students can still add a profile into the Blackboard, and it's globally in Blackboard. So you may even notice profile pictures in there already, and that's because they've already created a profile in a different course, and now they sort of already have it. Creating the profile picture in Collaborate, same benefits, it just has to be done while you're in Collaborate, like Lady and Lean did. Also, how do students receive the reminders? Do they send them emails, or are they only seen when they log into Blackboard? That's a really great question, and it was actually sort of a bug this summer, so that might be something that they're still working out. When you create a Blackboard announcement, it'll tell you that you can click on a box that'll say send email immediately. If you do that, they will get a sort of an email copy of the announcement, but then when they log in, they'll also see it as an announcement. The little bug that happened was sometimes we create our announcements, but we don't want them really to go out until, like, say, Monday morning. And so we won't click that box to send them out immediately. What they do is they get a notification notification that there's an announcement in Blackboard, and it kind of gives them that trigger to go in and check it out and see what the latest announcement is for the course. And it doesn't allow you to kind of automatically send out an email when that date and time restriction is realized. So that's the part that I'm hoping that they'll kind of work through. My next piece of advice here is using the send reminder feature that's semi-new. It's only been around for a little bit more than a year. But this is in the Blackboard Grade Center, so the full Grade Center. If you notice, let's say maybe the day before an assessment is due, several students have submitted it already, but you just want to send a reminder to the students that haven't completed it yet. Maybe you're just going to let them know that don't forget tomorrow, the Planet paper is due, so you know, make some time to work on it tonight. Whatever you want to say, you can kind of send that out. So you can just do that again by clicking on the drop-down menu at the top of the Grade Center column, and then the send reminder, and it will only send it to those that have not submitted an assignment yet. It's kind of a really easy way to send a reminder like that. The next thing is a little bit of what we talked about letting your students know what your expectations are. But you should give them some expectations of what you're going to do. So communication is a lot of feedback and back and forth. So make a commitment to your students that you're going to respond to them within a certain time frame and let them know what that is. Now, my general guideline to a response time is 24 to 48 hours. I add in my instructor area what my communication expectations are, and then I really try to commit to my students that I'm going to follow up on that. Couple good things, they will know that I will get back to them within 24 or 48 hours. But I'm not going to get back to them immediately or within the next hour and a half. So it gives me a little bit of wiggle room of I don't have to worry as much about those students that are emailing at 1 o'clock in the morning, because that's when they just finished up their paper and now they have some sort of question on it. I have 24 hours to get back to them. So usually that can be something that again, has to be trained the first couple of weeks to really let them know that, no, they're going to have to wait a bit. Now, your 24 hours might also be within a certain, only on business days, not on weekends, not in the evenings. It's your response expectations. The idea is just that you let your students know what they are and that you really commit to that response rate. Here's another great communication tip, and it has to get at that passion and that enthusiasm. If you want to create a weekly announcement or a module introduction, consider using media, using a video. This is a screenshot of me doing a video, and I turn the closed captionings on so you can see what I was saying in the video. But again, it kind of shows students what I look like. It shows my passion. It even shows my workspace behind me. But it can also, I can do it outside. I can do it at home. I've done weekly introduction videos at Husky football games, try to show a little Husky pride. It's really easy to do. I use my own cell phone. Natalie has some questions about adding the closed captions yourself. I upload it to YouTube. YouTube does a auto captioning, which is, I would say, maybe 70 to 80% accurate, but it doesn't do any punctuation, and it definitely can struggle with, you know, scientific terms, you know, other things like that. It kind of guesses on. So my method is actually to upload it to YouTube, have it auto transcribe, but then there's a process where you can just use those auto transcriptions and just kind of do some tweaking. So definitely shoot me an email if you're interested in knowing what that process is, because it definitely makes it easier. But kind of a different topic altogether, but if we do a video, they do need to be closed captioned to make them accessible to our students. So it looks like I got through those questions. I'm always trying to check in the text chat area, but if I miss any, just kind of, you know, throw it in there again or say, hey, I still had a question, and I will just definitely take a look through the text chat area for that. This one I threw out later than when I first did this workshop, and this is just because I get this question asked a lot. How often should you as the instructor be interacting with your students in a discussion forum? That again is just like your communication expectations. It's up to you, but if you really want to know what the research says. I recently spoke with Tom Tobin and his co-authors, and their research shows that the sweet spot seems to be about 10% participation in the discussion forums. Next great communication strategy is using the retention center. The retention center has been around for quite a while. You all have it in your courses, but you may not be aware of it. It's under the evaluation area in the left-hand navigation, and it is creating an at-risk table for you based off of the behaviors of your students. And so this can definitely be a good assessment tool to kind of gauge and measure where your students are at the course, but I like to use it as a communication tool. So you can see the 4 criteria: missed deadlines, grades alert, activity alert, and access alert. And so if any of these students kind of trigger these alerts, it puts them into this at-risk table. So for instance, in this example, there were 11 missed deadlines that students, Leonardo had. And so maybe I'm going to reach out to him at this point and say, hey, it looks like you're missing a lot of deadlines. You really need to step up your game. Let's talk about this. What's going on in your life that's creating these missed deadlines? And so in that case, you would click on this notify button, and it would send a notification to the students. And again, you can kind of craft that intervention that you want to do to help your students out. It's also going to create a notification history, and that way that's going to remind you when the last time you reached out to that student was. If you haven't heard back from them in a week, 2 weeks, they're missing more deadlines, maybe it's time to kind of accelerate that a little bit. Plus, it's a CYA tool. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to switch to grading. As time is quickly slipping away, and I'm sure you're going to want to know some of the grading strategies that I have for you. First one gets back to that missed deadlines a little bit. You want to keep your students and yourself on track. You really don't want them just to sort of slip behind on things, especially, you know, if you're teaching a 16-week course, it's one thing. Online courses often happen in the summer, and all of a sudden they're accelerated to 8 or even 4 weeks. So it's really important that the students stay on track. I'm going to give you some strategies there, but also some strategies for yourself. So let your students know when they are going to receive feedback from you. And that feedback is really what they may need to do the next assignment, what's going to improve the next iteration of a project. That's going to help them. They need feedback from the quizzes in order to take an exam. So let them know when they're going to receive that feedback and that grade. So again, they can anticipate that, they can move forward, but it also kind of is going to put you in a place where if you're telling them they're going to get feedback and grades at a certain time, you need to think about your grading track at that point. Maureen, I want to answer your question. Do you recommend using outside tools like Remind for this? I actually used to add Remind as a recommendation, but then I kind of changed it out with that Send Reminder. But Remind is a great tool. I'm glad you added the link in there. What that tool actually does is allows you to send out a text message to your students without that connection between giving out your cell phone number and necessarily having your student's cell phone number. So it's kind of nice that they can opt in and receive a text message without sharing personal information that maybe you're not comfortable with. So I'm glad you suggested it. Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about keeping yourself on track and pacing yourself if you're committed to a certain grading schedule. And so pull out your calendar, look at when you have different assessments due, and then think about when you're going to be able to grade that. So if you have an assignment that's due on the end of day on Sunday, are you going to allow yourself 2 to 3 days to do the grading and then post the grades on the third day? Kind of just map that all out and think about how that's going to affect your week. If you rather do your grading on the weekends, perhaps, then maybe you're going to make your due date on Friday and you're going to do your grading over the weekend. There's other instances where if you're just grading a discussion forum or maybe a really quick paper, maybe that 2 days is going to be enough, or even if it's an auto graded quiz or something like that, 2 days is going to be enough. But if you're kind of looking at it and everything is mapped out and you know that there's a major assessment, there's going to be essay questions that really need to be looked at, there's a major paper or part of a project that's going to take more grading, give yourself that time. Just let your students know that that is what's going to happen. Your paper is due on Sunday at the end of day. I really want to pay attention to it. Grading is going to take me a full week. You will receive feedback and grades by the following Friday. Whatever it is, give yourself that opportunity and pace yourself so that you suddenly don't run into the fact that, why did I just give myself 2 days to grade these papers that are really going to take more time? There are some other benefits that I've come across more recently in Blackboard that I like to share with you. One of them is in the needs grading area. It used to be that if you offered multiple attempts to your students, all of those attempts would show up in your needs grading area. And what you really wanted to do was look at the last attempt because, you're pretty sure that's going to be the one that's going to be their best work. And so now you're able to only see those last attempts to grade. But if you do want to go back and look at drafts or look at previous attempts, you can go ahead and click on this button that says Show Attempts that don't contribute to the user grade. So being able to toggle that button on and off, you can clean up your needs grading area, only look at those last attempts, or you can kind of expand it out and look at all of the attempts to kind of give you a story about how the iterations, how the drafts happen. Another great feature is in the inline grading of submissions that were submitted through Blackboard. It now gives the students a submission receipt. So this is kind of a prevention of a Blackboard ate my homework. So if Taco ate the homework before, students definitely will use the excuse that I submitted the assignment, I just don't know what happened to it. And so now Blackboard we'll give them that submission receipt. And if Blackboard really did eat their homework, then they can give you that submission confirmation number. And that's also something that you can look up. So you can see that the students did try to submit something, and something else happened that caused it to go away, which honestly does not happen very often. Usually that's the internet went down in the middle of the submission and they thought they had submitted it, but really they were submitting it to nothing because the internet was down. Another tool that we always recommend here in faculty development is interactive rubrics. They take some work to create up front, but you can use them over and over again. If you create a great discussion board rubric, you're not creating it each time, you're just connecting it to that great discussion board rubric. But then it makes your grading so much easier because you're just clicking on buttons. Again, your expectations are right there, very clear on what you're looking for your students. If they wonder why they didn't get a certain point value, that expectation should be very clear to them through what button you click on. But also, I think more so if they haven't met expectations, I like to personalize and be more specific in the feedback area of the rubric. And, maybe it's as simple in this example of there's expectation of a minimum of 250 words. If I simply click below expectations and say your entry was only 100 words, there's less of that discussion about why did I get the grade that I did, but they immediately know what they need to do to improve their grade. Another kind of new thing is that for several years there was a bug in Blackboard where you could not export the rubric. That has been fixed. So you can export rubrics from one course to another. If you have colleagues that have a really great rubric, they can now export the rubric. It will become a zip file, share it with you. You can import that into your course. So that is a fantastic improvement that's just come about in the last year and a half. Another strategy, not as techy maybe, but is to start a feedback bank or a feedback table. So any way that you know that it's something maybe common that you always kind of give to your students, kind of store those instead of having to write these brilliant feedback phrases every time something comes up. So I arrange my feedback bank into these two columns. One is positive and one is constructive. I have an entire workshop on feedback strategies. It's a passion of mine. Come to that workshop if you want to hear more about that. But the idea is that you're going to have more complete, well-constructed feedback if you're not having to recreate and make up each time you're giving feedback to your students. You can kind of open up this feedback bank and copy and paste some of these things into your students' work. Again, making your grade flow more efficient, but really still giving your students really good feedback. Okay, so we're going to switch to our last thing. So I want to pause for just a moment before we start talking about strategies for supporting students in their success. Please, if you just would like to add any grading strategies that you've come across, I would love to have more ideas and incorporate them into the next time I do this workshop. So again, add them into the text chat area. And I'll just take this time of day, I always need a sip of water. Sometimes I need to turn my microphone off and my webcam off and sneeze or cough. I don't feel like doing that right now, so that's a good sign. The first strategy, I want to see what Karen wrote. I have a question. Do online courses usually assign more, less, or the same amount of graded work as compared to an in-person class? That is usually dependent on what your learning objectives are for the course, and how you're going to measure those learning objectives are through assessments. I will tell you one thing that is a little bit different. I often hear there's a lot more written work, or now you're doing discussion boards that you have to grade, and it used to be a discussion just happened in your course. So, oh my grading just increased. So just stop and think a little bit about once you get a course really well developed and your presentations and your content is already in the course, you're going to be spending less time sort of delivering your lectures, or that time that you would be spending in class. You're going to be spending more time communicating with your students, giving them rich feedback, and some of that feedback is going to be in the grading. So I'm not going to say it's going to be more, but I'm going to say that I think you're going to see that your grading is going to increase, and that kind of time you're lecturing is going to decrease. So you're giving each other some feedback, so that's great. What is a good way to have a cyber meeting with students who might want to discuss a paper? That's really a great question, and I would actually recommend doing a collaborate session like we're doing right now. It's kind of reconstructing your office hours. So just to kind of give you an example, I have a major project at the end of the course that I teach. And so I recognize that the students are going to have some questions on that going forward, and they're going to want to know how they're doing if they've sort of done a draft. So I will schedule usually a couple, just to get around their schedules. And I'm going to say, for 2 hours this week, I'm going to be available online. I will give them a Blackboard Collaborate link, like the link to this workshop. And sometimes I just hang out for that hour, but often, more often than that, I'll get 2 or 3 or 8 people in there, and they'll have questions. And that's how I have that discussion with them. If we do a collaborate session like now with video audio, do you have subtitles for what we say in real time? You have the ability to request a captionist from the Disability Resource Center. So that's actually a really good segue into supporting your students, which is what we're talking about now. So if you do have a student that requires an accommodation and you want to have a session like that, you can request the services of the captionist, and they actually just fill a role. You assign them a role in the course. They usually like to know, they like to see your PowerPoint presentation up front, maybe a little bit about terms that might, again, be more discipline specific, so that they're ready for that, but they're definitely able to do that. For a recording, if it is something that is really important to your content, into your course delivery, and you've recorded it like I'm recording today, then I would do the same method as my welcome video, where I would add it into YouTube and then do a transcription, so they had that kind of subtitle, like you said, at the bottom of it. So I hope that helps, but I want to make sure that we keep moving along. My first recommendation is perhaps a pre-survey. So whether that be a little bit of information you want to know that maybe is a prerequisite knowledge. Maybe it's a technology survey because you want to know how comfortable they are using certain things. Maybe it's just, again, getting to know a little bit more about them. Try a pre-survey early in the course, and it works in a lot of ways to understand your students and better be able to support them. We just covered the cyber meeting, our hosting a virtual office hour, so you just jumped in there ahead of me like that. It definitely had a twist of how to help them with an assessment. but you can host a virtual office hour. Another great example that's maybe outside of an assessment, host one maybe in the first week. Help your students know how to navigate through the course. That's what they're stressed out about in that first week. And if they're stressed out about the navigation, they can't sort of free themselves up to really start digging into the content. So hosting a virtual office hour just to show them the structure and how they can navigate through the course is a really good way of doing that. You could also have students do their own collaborate sessions. Maybe it's going to be a study group or a group project, and you want them to be able to kind of interact with each other. So use Collaborate for any of those ideas. Another one, provide a space for frequently asked questions or a Q&A discussion. They're going to have these questions come up. And so if you give them a place in Blackboard, in the course somewhere, to ask those types of questions that aren't maybe as content specific, those questions aren't going to get kind of lost in the more content-rich discussions. If you notice them come up, maybe semester after semester, that is your clue that maybe that's a frequently asked question. You can add an item, a student support area to your left-hand navigation and provide them with those frequently asked questions. If it's frequently asked enough, you may even want to think, do I want to like rewrite my instructions? Or do I want to tweak up my navigation a little bit because they seem to be struggling with it? So I think that providing the frequently asked questions or a Q&A discussion is a great tool, but it's almost a little bit of a self-evaluation piece for us to know that things might need to be tweaked a little bit. It's one of the reasons I always go back and watch recordings of my sessions, because the types of questions that I get in the text chat area is my indicator that things may need to be tweaked up a little bit. Next one is a strategy called the Muddiest Point. It's actually more of a face-to-face strategy. I think a lot of these strategies that we do in our face-to-face course we can just tweak in an online course. I used to do this one all the time. Muddiest Point. What are you most confused about today? We used to do it in a variety of ways. Maybe it's index cards that they turn in at the end of the session, and I would ask the students, what did you find most interesting and what are you still confused about? You can still do that in an online course. Whether it's a discussion board, my favorite way to do it in an online course is actually to do a reflection journal. So at the end of each week, students can just kind of share in their reflection journal, just between the student and I, what they may be still confused about. And, you can get at that a little bit earlier and really help them move forward with the course. The next one is remember that there are other support units out there and to refer your students to them. Again, I have an entire workshop on these, but I will share some of the ones that I've kind of pulled out for you here. First, the Disability Resource Center, since we just talked about it, let your students know that that support is there for them. And maybe that's, again, in the left-hand navigation with the student support area. Definitely let them know about the service desk and the Do It service desk, so that if they have any technical questions with Blackboard, they're going to go and try to reach out to those folks. For technical support, I usually encourage my students to also CC me so that they're getting that support they need, but then I know that they had an issue with it. Again, perhaps the internet went down when they were submitting something, and I'm aware that that sort of happened, and then can kind of support the students with that as we kind of resubmit that assignment. The next one is the library. The library has a lot of great online support, has a lot of great online databases. So I let my students know about that by giving them a link to the libraries. There's an Ask a Librarian question in there that they can use as online students that may never come to campus. So I think that's really helpful. Actually, just found out yesterday that online students that use the databases and other things through the library still need a one card. So as I find more information out about that, we will definitely share it with our mailing list. But I guess encourage your students to still get a one card if they, even if they're an online student, so that they can use all of the support services that are available to them. There are other ones that may be more specific to your discipline. It just takes a little bit of research to find, maybe a little digging into your own department's website. The Writing Center is another one. The Writing Center has, they use Google Hangouts for writing sessions. And so you might have felt like, well, I can't send my online students to the Writing Center because they can't physically come to the Writing Center. They actually can because the Writing Center provides that. Yeah, I have that link too. Those are definitely some of my favorites. Sorry to be the new person, but where is Blackboard Collaborate Ultra? Is it completely separate from regular Blackboard? How do you set up a live session like this? You absolutely can find it in your Blackboard course. You can look under Course Tools. In the control panel at the bottom of the left-hand navigation, you'll see Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Or if you go to the My Tools area, you'll also see all of the tools there, but you'll see a link to Collaborate Ultra. We do a session on how to use Blackboard Collaborate Ultra at least a couple times a semester. You can definitely ask for a consultation with us and we can show you how to use it. But when I send out my thank you email with our survey and a copy of this recording, I will also give you some links to how to use the Blackboard interface, and you can start by exploring there. Some of the best practices that I have that I thought just warranted a little bit of a call out at the end here is a suggestion to use your student preview mode. That is at the top of Blackboard. Top right-hand side, to me it looks like an eyeball or kind of a recycling swirl. That'll give you the student view of what your course looks like. So if you're wondering if your friends could see something or whether you've hidden it, or if you want to look at my grades, any of that, use the student preview mode. You can actually submit work using the student preview mode and then go back and go out of it and grade your work. It kind of gives you that total picture of what the students are seeing and maybe even looking at the what happens in my grades or how they can see your feedback. All of that is great to use student preview mode for. Next one, reverse order your course. I think when we put together our course, you know, we start with week 2 and we kind of build out until we get to week 16. After they're built out, you can kind of drag and drop and move everything into that reverse order. That way, the most current folder that the student needs is at the top. And that's because you might have used your date and time restrictions to hide all those folders until that week is sort of upon your students. So reverse order is a great tip for that. And it goes along with the next one, availability, date and time restrictions. It's in many of the content areas in Blackboard. So students may start your course in week 1 and they're only going to see that week 1 folder, but you've already built it all out. You just date restricted it. Or you've got it hidden from your students until they're ready for it. Enable grading and discussion forums. This is one that we see happens time to time, but if you are doing a content-rich graded discussion forum, there's actually a little box to click that says enable grading for the discussion forums. Then you put in the point values, you can add your rubrics, all of that. But if you don't click it, you're not going to get that, that feature where it's going to add a grade center column for you. It also just collates all of a single user's discussion forums. So if you're kind of counting them up when you're grading them, it just does a nice job by using enable grading. So definitely, if you're using discussion boards, click that box. If you have any more questions on that, you know, again, shoot us an email. We're coming into the last few minutes, so I'm kind of like rapid fire now. But my last one is to model the behaviors you want. So any type of behavior, whether it's formal writing, the civility of discussion boards post, that kind of netiquette stuff, what you want to share as part of your profession, or your hobbies, any of those behaviors, those expectations you have of your students, you're going to want to make sure you model those. One of the most critical ones I think of is if you want your students to formally cite their work, you should be formally citing your work. So if you're letting them know what article that they need to read or what textbook they need to use, you should be using your discipline's formal citation style because you are modeling what you expect out of your students. So here's what we talked about in the last hour. But just if I was to pull out one detail for each one, communicate with your students often. Don't wait. Don't leave them in the dark for several weeks before they hear from you. Communicate often. Grade your student work, but use the tools that you have available. Support your online students. Use the other resources that are here at NIU. Use your colleagues. They're also your resources. And then remember to take care of yourself and manage your workload. That is really going to help you, but it's really going to help your students too. I hear the chimes again ringing here. We're coming up on 1 o'clock. Again, my name is Tracy Miller. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. I could talk about all of these things for hours, so please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk about more strategy, more practical tips on delivering your online course. Thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. Again, you're all going to get the recording. You're